November 14, 2012, 7th Avenue and 55th Street, Manhattan. The last customer walked out of the Carnegie Deli at 4:47 in the morning. He had ordered the same thing he always ordered. The counterman who made it had been making it for 19
I made
years.
it how you like it.
Neither of them said anything about the fact that it was the last time. Neither of them knew. The Carnegie did not close that night. It closed 4 years later, in 2016, after 79 years of continuous operation. But something ended on that November morning that nobody recorded and nobody marked: the specific configuration of that counterman, that customer, that dish, at that hour in that room. And when it ended, it joined the long list of things that were over before anyone thought to say so. 5 delis, 15 dishes, 0 of them available anywhere on Earth today. What you are about to hear is not a history. It is a set of last tastes. The final versions of specific preparations made in specific rooms by specific people, served to customers who did not know they were eating something for the last time, consumed and gone, and now existing only in the memory of whoever was in the room when it happened. We are going to name what was in those rooms. We are going to be precise about what was lost and exactly how it was lost. And we are going to do it because the alternative, the silence that follows when nobody names what is gone, is the one thing these places do not deserve. If you ate at any of these delis, if you sat in one of these booths, ordered from one of these countermen, tasted one of these dishes, this channel needs what you remember. Subscribe now and bring it with you. What you carry may be the last copy of something that exists nowhere else. There were, at the peak of New York's Jewish delicatessen culture in 1931, approximately 5,000 delis operating across the 5 boroughs. By 2016, when the Carnegie Deli served its last sandwich, that number had fallen below 30. The closings did not happen all at once. They happened the way the tide goes out, gradually, then completely, each closing unremarkable in itself, until the accumulation became undeniable. The Stage Deli on 7th Avenue, opened since 1937, closed in 2012. Lindy's on Broadway, where the cheesecake had been a New York institution since 1921, closed in 1969, the original location gone, the name sold and reattached to something that shared only the word. The Gaiety Delicatessen on Broadway, where theater people had eaten after midnight since the 1920s, closed without announcement in 1977. The 2nd Avenue Deli, closed in 2006, reopened under different ownership in a different location. The same name, a different institution. What closed with each of these places was not just a menu. It was the specific human configuration that had produced each dish. The particular cook, the particular supplier, the particular oven, the particular customer who had been ordering the same thing for 30 years and whose loyalty had kept that dish on the menu long after it had become economically irrational to make it. Ted Merwin, in his History of the American Jewish Deli, describes these institutions as places where food and identity were inseparable, where what you ordered said something about who you were and where you came from and what you understood yourself to be. When the institutions closed, the identity claims they had supported became unanchored. The food that had carried those claims became unavailable. The people who had made the food dispersed into retirement and silence, and nobody asked them what they knew before they left, and what they knew left with them. Pay close attention to item 11. What it reveals about why the most famous deli in New York served a dish that nobody has been able to replicate since it closed will reframe everything you think you know about what made these places irreplaceable. We will get there. Do not leave before we do. The Stage Deli chopped liver, not Carnegie's, not Katz's, the Stage's. The distinction mattered to everyone who had eaten both, and everyone who had eaten both had an opinion about which was superior. And the opinion was held with the intensity of a religious position because in the secular synagogue of the New York Jewish Deli, chopped liver was theology. The Stage Deli on 7th Avenue, opened by Max Asnas in 1937, and operated by his family until its closing in 2012, made its chopped liver from chicken livers broiled directly over an open flame until the exterior had charred and the interior was just cooked through, then chopped by hand in a wooden bowl with schmaltz caramelized onion, hard-boiled egg, salt, and a specific amount of white pepper that the kitchen did not publish, and that former employees have described differently in every interview ever conducted about it. The pepper was the stage's signature, present enough to warm the back of the palate without announcing itself as pepper, integrated into the fat and the liver and the egg in a way that made the whole preparation taste more complete than the sum of its parts. Max Asness died in 1964. His family continued the kitchen standards through 2 generations of ownership. When the stage closed in 2012, the cook who had been making the chopped liver for 11 years retired to his daughter's home in New Jersey. He has not given an interview. The pepper ratio went with him. Lindy's cheesecake, the original, from the original location on Broadway between 49th and 50th Streets, which operated from 1921 until its closing in 1969. Not the cheesecake sold under the Lindy's name at the successor locations, the original. Leo Lindy opened his restaurant in 1921 and developed, in collaboration with his baker, a cheesecake that became so famous that Damon Runyon fictionalized it in his Broadway stories, and the recipe was allegedly stolen, copied, approximated, and pursued by food writers for 50 years after the original closed. The distinguishing features of the original Lindy's cheesecake, as reconstructed from customer accounts and a partial recipe published in a 1950s newspaper column, were a cookie crust made from a specific combination of flour, butter, and sugar that was pressed rather than rolled. A filling made from cream cheese and farmer's cheese in a ratio that the bakery never disclosed. A baking process conducted at a temperature lower than any published cheesecake recipe of the era recommended, for a duration longer than any published recipe specified, producing a texture that was neither the dense New York style nor the light Italian style, but something between them that set slowly and carried a specific wobble at the center when the pan was moved. The cheesecake that sold under the Lindy's name after the original location closed was made from a recipe that the new owners purchased from the estate of someone who had worked at the original. Former customers of the original tried it once. Most of them did not return. The wobble was gone. The wobble had been everything. Gaiety Delicatessen tongue on rye, the sandwich that the theater community of Broadway ate after midnight for 50 years. From the Gaiety's opening in the early 1920s until its closing in 1977. The Gaiety on Broadway was not famous in the way the Carnegie and the stage were famous. It was not a destination. It was a neighborhood institution for a specific neighborhood. The blocks around Times Square where the theaters were, populated after 11 at night by performers, stagehands, directors, and the particular species of New York night person who lived on the schedule of the stage. The tongue sandwich the Gaiety served was distinguishable from other deli tongue sandwiches by 2 specifics that former customers consistently describe. The tongue was sliced thicker than the deli standard, 3/8 of an inch rather than the paper-thin cutting that most delis practiced. And it was served warm rather than cold, having been held in a steam tray at a temperature that kept the meat moist without cooking it further. The bread was club rye, not the standard deli rye, with a firmer crust that held the warm meat without going soft. A mustard that the Gaiety made in-house, coarser than the commercial yellow and sharper than the deli brown, was applied to both slices. The sandwich cost 40 cents in 1965. It was the thing you ate at midnight after a show, and the thing you ate at midnight after a show becomes inseparable from the experience of being the kind of person who is out after midnight after a show. And when the Gaiety closed in 1977 and that sandwich disappeared, what disappeared with it was a specific version of a specific New York life that has not been available since. Here is what connects every dish on this list to a force larger than any individual deli's closing. And it is a force this video is going to name directly rather than imply. The delis that housed these dishes were concentrated in Manhattan neighborhoods, Midtown, the Theater District, the Upper West Side, where commercial real estate values began their sustained climb in the mid-1970s and did not stop. The Stage Deli paid rent on 7th Avenue that was manageable in 1970 and catastrophic by 2000. The Carnegie Deli's rent in its final decade was a number that required the sandwich to be priced at a level that priced out the clientele that had built the institution. The Gaiety closed in 1977, not because the theater community stopped eating tongue at midnight, but because the building that housed the Gaiety was sold to a developer who had a different use for the space. Real estate did not close these delis as a side effect of some larger process. Real estate closed these delis directly, specifically, by making the ground beneath them worth more than the institution standing on it. A dish that fed Broadway after midnight for 50 years was killed by a developer's calculation that the square footage was more valuable empty than full. Nobody voted on that calculation. Nobody was asked. Carnegie Deli hot pastrami, the sandwich that became the international symbol of New York Jewish deli food, photographed 10,000 times, referenced in 100 films, ordered by visitors from every country on Earth who came to 7th Avenue specifically to eat it. What those visitors ate, and what the Carnegie served for 79 years, was pastrami made from a specific preparation that the Carnegie's kitchen conducted in-house through the 1970s. Navel-cut beef, cured in a brine of salt, sugar, coriander, black pepper, and garlic for a minimum of 10 days, then rubbed with a spice mixture and smoked over hardwood for 6 to 8 hours, then steamed to order for 45 minutes before slicing. The Carnegie's pastrami was distinguishable from every other deli pastrami in New York by its fat content. The navel cut carries more intramuscular fat than the brisket that most delis switched to in the 1970s, when navel became difficult to source consistently, and by the specific bark produced by its spice rub, which was dark and slightly sweet at the edges where the sugar in the rub had caramelized against the smoke. When the Carnegie began purchasing pre-smoked pastrami from a commercial supplier in the 1980s, a decision driven by the economics of maintaining a smoking operation in a Manhattan commercial kitchen, the pastrami changed in ways that longtime customers noticed and newcomers did not. The newcomers were more numerous. The longtime customers said nothing that changed anything. The Carnegie closed in 2016. The in-house smoking had stopped 30 years before the closing, which means the Carnegie's most famous dish had already been a different dish for 3 decades before the institution itself ended. The name stayed the same. The thing the name described had already gone. What you're about to hear is the item this entire video was constructed to document. Set down whatever you are doing. This one requires your full attention. The Stage Deli Celebrity Sandwich System. Specifically, the sandwich named for a customer who came in every Tuesday for 22 years, and whose order never varied, and whose name is on a laminated card that no longer exists above a booth, that no longer exists in a deli, that no longer exists on a street where the building has been converted to something else entirely. Max Asness, who opened the stage in 1937, began the practice of naming sandwiches after celebrity customers in the 1940s, a marketing decision that became a cultural institution, with the stage's menu eventually carrying the names of Milton Berle, Eddie Cantor, Danny Kaye, and dozens of others who had eaten there regularly enough to earn the designation. What the histories of the Stage Deli do not record, what Ted Merwin's book does not capture, and what the newspaper profiles of the deli's closing did not mention, is the parallel system of named sandwiches for non-celebrity regulars that Max Asness maintained from the deli's early years until his death in 1964. These were not on the printed menu. They were on cards above specific booths, handwritten, updated when the regular's order changed, removed when the regular died or stopped coming. A man named Bernie Kaufman ate at the stage every Tuesday from 1941 until 1963, always in the same booth, always the same sandwich, corned beef and tongue on club rye with the stage's house mustard and a half-sour pickle. And above his booth, On a card in Max Asness's handwriting was written, Bernie's. When Bernard Kaufman died in February of 1963, Max Asness left the card above the booth for 3 months before removing it. The booth was not reserved in that time. Other customers sat in it. The card remained above it because Max Asness understood that the card was not for Bernard Kaufman anymore. It was for everyone who had known Bernard Kaufman and who would look up at the card and understand, without being told, what it meant that the card was still there. When Max Asness died the following year, the cards for the non-celebrity regulars were not maintained by his successors. The practice ended because the person who had understood its meaning was gone, and the meaning could not be transferred to someone who had not invented it. The stage continued for another 48 years. Bernie's booth continued to be a booth, the card was gone, and the practice was gone, and the understanding of what the practice had meant, that the regular customer was not a customer but a member, and that membership was acknowledged in handwriting above a specific seat. That understanding left with Max Asness and did not return. If you ate at the stage, the Carnegie, Lindy's, the Gaiety, or any deli that has closed, leave the name of the deli and one dish in the comments. Not a review, a record. The comment section of this video is assembling the last inventory of what these places served, compiled from the memories of the people who were there. Your memory is evidence. Leave it here, where it becomes part of something larger than a single recollection. 2nd Avenue Deli chopped herring, the preparation that the 2nd Avenue Deli on 2nd Avenue and 10th Street, opened from 1954 until its closing in 2006, made from salt herring soaked overnight in cold water to draw the brine, then drained and chopped by hand with green apple, raw onion, hard-boiled egg, and a small amount of white vinegar until the mixture was a coarse, grey-pink paste that looked, as one longtime customer described it in a 2007 interview, like nothing you would choose to eat until you tasted it, at which point you understood that everything you had chosen before had been the wrong choice. The 2nd Avenue Deli's chopped herring was made daily by a prep cook, whose name the deli's historian, the late Abe Lebowall, who founded the deli and was murdered in 1996 in a robbery that the city never solved, had recorded in a notebook that his family has not made public. The herring required salt-packed whole fish from a specific importer who retired in 1989. After 1989, the 2nd Avenue Deli sourced from a successor importer whose product the prep cook considered inferior and who adjusted the recipe's vinegar and apple quantities to compensate. The adjusted version was what was served from 1989 until the deli's closing in 2006. The original version, the version made with the first importer's herring, before the adjustment, exists in the memory of customers who ate it before 1989 and who describe it as categorically different from what came after. The deli closed. The importer retired. The prep cook's name is in a notebook. The notebook is closed. Carnegie Deli matzoh ball soup, specifically the soup served during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when the Carnegie's kitchen made a version of its standard chicken soup with a preparation difference that the deli never advertised and that regular customers discovered by returning year after year and noticing that the soup tasted different in September than it did in March. The difference, reconstructed from accounts of former kitchen staff, was the addition of a small amount of saffron to the broth during the holiday period. Not enough to color the soup visibly, not enough to be identified as saffron by anyone who did not already know it was there, but enough to add a warmth and a depth to the broth's flavor that the standard preparation did not carry. The matzoh balls in the holiday version were also made with a higher ratio of schmaltz than the standard recipe, producing a ball that was softer at the center and richer throughout. The Carnegie never put the holiday soup on the menu as a separate item. It appeared, unnamed and unannounced, in September, and the customers who had been coming long enough to notice it returned specifically for it. And the customers who had not been coming long enough simply ate what they were served and found it good without knowing what made it different. When the kitchen staff that had maintained the holiday preparation turned over in the 1990s, the preparation was not documented and was not transmitted. The saffron soup ended not with the deli's closing, but with the retirement of the person who had remembered to add the saffron. The closing came later. The loss came first. Gaiety Delicatessen brisket, the Tuesday and Thursday preparation that was never on the printed menu, and that the Gaiety's regulars ordered by saying the brisket, with an article that implied there was no other brisket to consider, made from a flat-cut brisket braised in a liquid of onion, tomato, a small amount of red wine, and the accumulated drippings of previous braises that the Gaiety's kitchen added to each new batch, rather than starting fresh. The same principle of continuous flavor accumulation that governed the perpetual soup pot and the unsoaped schmaltz crock of the immigrant kitchen applied to a braising liquid that deepened across weeks and months of continuous use. The brisket that came out of that liquid in October tasted different from the brisket that came out of it in January, because the liquid in January carried the history of every brisket that had been braised in it since September. This is not mysticism. This is the chemistry of long-cooked collagen and caramelized protein accumulating in a liquid over time, and it produces flavors that a fresh braising liquid cannot achieve, regardless of what ingredients are added to it. When the Gaiety closed in 1977, the braising liquid that had been in continuous use for years was discarded. There was nowhere to transfer it. There was no successor kitchen that understood what it was or what it had taken years to become. It went down a drain in a kitchen that was being stripped for the next tenant, and what went down the drain with it was a flavor history that had required years to build, and that ended in an afternoon. Lindy's strawberry cheesecake, the seasonal variation that appeared on the Lindy's menu from May through August in the original Broadway location, and that former customers describe as categorically different from the standard cheesecake in texture and flavor. Not because the cheesecake itself was different, but because of the preparation of the strawberries, macerated overnight in a small amount of sugar and a larger amount of lemon juice, then reduced briefly in a pan until they had released most of their moisture and concentrated into a sauce that was intensely flavored without being sweet in the way that commercial strawberry topping is sweet. The sauce was applied cold, directly before serving, to a cheesecake that had been refrigerated overnight. The contrast between the cold, dense cake and the cold, intensely flavored sauce, not sweet, not tart, but both simultaneously, was, according to a woman interviewed in 1995, who had eaten it every summer from 1935 until 1968, the specific flavor memory she would choose if she could taste one thing from her past exactly as it had been. She was 78 years old when she said this. She died in 2001. The strawberry cheesecake died in 1969 with the original Lindy's. The woman who remembered it exactly is gone too. What remains is her description, recorded by a food historian, of a flavor that no longer exists anywhere except in that description, which is a kind of existence and also a kind of haunting. The 5 delis on this list operated for a combined total of 231 years. They served millions of meals. They employed thousands of cooks, countermen, bakers, and waitresses whose names are almost entirely unrecorded. They produced dishes of specific excellence that existed nowhere else and that ended when the delis ended, not because the recipes were secret and not because the ingredients were unavailable, but because the dishes required a specific human configuration, a specific cook in a specific kitchen with a specific supplier and a specific customer whose loyalty had kept the dish on the menu, and that configuration, once dissolved, cannot be reconstituted by anyone who was not inside it. The real estate developer who converted the Gaiety's building did not understand that he was also converting a braising liquid that had taken years to become what it was. The commercial supplier who replaced the Carnegie's in-house smoking did not understand that he was replacing not just a process, but a flavor history that the process had built over decades. The systems that ended these dishes were not malicious. They were indifferent, which is worse, because indifference does not leave a villain to blame. It leaves only an absence, The booth without the card, the soup without the saffron, the cheesecake without the wobble. And an absence cannot be argued with or appealed to or held accountable for what it has taken. Go find a photograph of one of these delis. Not a review, not a menu reproduction. A photograph of the room, the booths, the counter, the dessert case, the light coming through the window at a specific hour. Look at it for long enough that the room becomes real to you rather than historical.
Sounds perfect, Izzy.
Then leave a comment below this video that names one thing in that photograph, one detail, one object, one quality of light that you would give something to be able to walk into right now. The comments below this video are the closest thing that exists to those rooms anymore. They are imperfect, and they are insufficient, and they are what we have, and what we have deserves to be used. So use it, because the alternative to naming what is gone is acting as if it were never there, and these places were there, and they mattered, and the people who filled them mattered. And the food that fed those people carried something that deserved to outlast the leases that ran out, and the rents that rose, and the developers who looked at these rooms and saw only square footage where other people had seen, for decades, something that felt like home.